Welcome, Joe Gavalis again with the Safe Senior Hour. I hope you all are doing well. Again, we always start off every show reminding everybody that elder abuse does not report itself, and that our definition of elder abuse is three different areas. One is physical, which I think people pretty much can see and judge. Second is financial, which is by far the biggest fraud against the elderly. And three is institutional, which is just horrible situations dealing with people in long-term care or personal care homes, and ways that we can help and get the professionals involved to make sure that people in their elder years or later years are living in a respectable, healthy manner. The show has a website called, not a website, an email, safe at, it's safe at americaswebradio.com. Please email your comments, your requests, or any situations that you have that are of concern, and we will be glad to discuss them or get you to the right person or right agency to help. It's a situation where people are out there to help. You just need to know who to go to and get some help. Don't live with this anxiety that you know somebody that's being victimized. Get it to the professionals, let them do their job. I think that's a important message. I spoke to about 45 seniors last week, at the end of last week, and that was their concern. Who do I go to? What rather, I don't want to bother anybody. Well, you're not bothering anybody. That's what these professionals get paid for. So please contact them, whether it be Adult Protective Services in your states, or a sheriff or police, whoever your local law enforcement agency is. Please contact them. Let the professionals make the decision. And if you're concerned about a loved one in another state or another area, you haven't heard from them, and which is highly unusual, and you think there could be something wrong, please call the local law enforcement and ask for a welfare check. They are happy to do it. They will fit it in when time is downtime for them, when they can go between calls and check on a loved one. We've had too many instances, and it just happened again, where a gentleman was out in the garden in the back of the house. His wife was in the house, and he had no way to contact anybody, and he fell. And finally, somebody said they couldn't get in touch with him. The wife couldn't find him, and she called the police, and they actually found him way in the back of the yard where he had fallen and broken his hip. So, I mean, that's one situation where the wife was there and couldn't find her husband. But on these other situations, when you're out of town and the person lives alone, please don't hesitate to call local law enforcement and let them make the decision to go check on the senior. It is a big help, and it helps a lot of people. It will save a lot of people from laying there in pain and not being helped. As you know, as you get older, you're more inclined to sometimes fall or trip and break bones or particularly hips or things like that, and you lay there. And so it's important that that a loved one or a friend who doesn't hear from an elderly person, that they know to call their local law enforcement and ask for a welfare check. The show today will be for segments 2, 3, and 4. We're going to have Steve Baker come back on. Steve was on the show, I think, a month or two ago. But Steve is the founder and authors the Baker Fraud Report that deals with frauds, basically dealing with the elderly. And we will have him on to discuss some various new frauds and new developments in the area combating elder fraud. He is a former federal official who spent 30 years fighting consumer frauds for the Federal Trade Commission and was on many task forces. So we look forward to Steve coming on in segments 2, 3, and 4. When I was speaking to those 45 seniors, the big question also was, why me? Why have they picked on me? And the answer is simple. When you're an elder person, the idea is that you're number one in our generation. You are very trusting, and trusting meaning that you'll consummate a deal with a handshake, or you believe people. So the professional fraudsters know that. So they are very good at trying to talk you into things, because, as you know, the term used to be, a deal's a deal's a deal. The second point about elderly, that we're able to save money. Some people might not be a lot, some people might be a whole amount of money, but usually that through being prudent living that you've saved some. Now, as I tour around the rural areas of North Georgia, that could be a box full of money, like $500 they have hidden under the bed, because I had a gentleman tell me that. He said, you just got to find the bed and where I hid it. I said, well, nobody's looking for your $500 except the fraudsters, because they think you can give that up pretty easy. But some of us are very fortunate. We're able to invest, have IRAs or very good retirement plans, and have very good savings. So the fraudsters know, number one, that we're very trusting people, and number two, that we've been able to save a little bit of money. And the third area that they prey on is the elders' love for their family, not just their family, but particularly their children and their grandchildren. And as you know, we've talked about many times, one of the biggest scams actually perpetrated against elders is called the grandparent scam. And that is based on those three discussion items I just had. One, we're trusting. Two, we have some money. And three, we will help our grandkids. And that's why it's called the grandparent scam. And it can happen in many ways and to many different people. The latest one I heard was a individual had been in got a phone call and was in in this case, it was a Mexican jail for, what do they call it? The vacations for the kids out of college. And they were down there partying. Well, this call came in with an accent to Mrs. So-and-so and said, your grandson left it blank again. And she said, in this case, she said, Bob is down here and he's in jail here in Mexico, and he doesn't want his parents to know, but please send money he asked me to call you and ask for you to send money to bail him out, because he doesn't want to be in jail and he wants to get back to the United States. But more importantly, he doesn't want you, the grandparent, to call his parents. Well, this woman that tells the story thought that her grandson does travel. He was in college and could have gone to Mexico. So all of this was feasible. And as she said, they knew his name, but after talking to her, she actually gave him the name. So based on that, she was convinced that she needed immediately to send money to get her grandson Bob out of jail in Mexico. They asked her, at first she had two choices, to wire money or to go buy they said an iTunes card because that's the quickest way he can get out, because the money will be immediately put into the account once the grandmother bought the iTunes card. And then all she had to do was, when they called back, give her the number on the back of the card. That money would be transferred immediately into the account in Mexico for the, they said to her, for the court, so he could get out on bond and could come back later for trial. Obviously, the comment was, well, he'll just forfeit bond and stay in the United States. Well, she did it once, small amount of money. I think, I don't know, the amount was like $2,500. Well, they called her again, said it wasn't enough, and wanted $5,000. At that time, she went to a trusted friend, and that friend told her, you need to go to law enforcement, that nobody knows anybody pays by iTunes cards to any government. And she thought about it, and she said, well, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But she said it was in Mexico, and that was the quickest way to get her grandson out. They brought law enforcement in. Law enforcement confirmed that her grandson was fine, was in college. Actually, was in college in Florida. Had not gone to Mexico, had never been to Mexico. But it was a way that the professional scammers applied those three issues dealing with seniors. Number one, that people are very trusting, elders are trusting. Number two, that we have a little bit of money. And three, we love our grandkids. So for the people out there, if you get these calls, even though you'd like to be a good grandparent, please call the authorities. And especially when people want you to pay by either wiring money or by paying by iTunes cards. It is not a good situation at all. We've had here, just changing the subject now to institutional abuse. We had here, and this is something unusual, we had our third case of insects, or in this case, ants, at the at a long-term care facility. A lawsuit has been filed that the senior was in 92, was just that her body and her bed was infested with ants. The moral of that is, if you see something, say something. Please call the authorities and make it known, or talk to the ombudsman at these long-term care facilities. With that, we'll break now and get ready for our guest in segment 2.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862.
Mr. Baker.
And speak to a
Yes, good morning.
Yeah, we'll be coming to you in just a couple of minutes, okay?
Can be helped to
Okay.
enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Get your pen and paper ready. If there's a move in your near future, I'm here to tell you that the folks I used and now recommend is Around Town Movers. Timothy and the guys recently moved me, and I am and was totally satisfied with a sometimes not so fun experience moving. Call Timothy at 770-378-4708 and make it a good move and a good experience. Around Town Movers for that local or cross-country move. Timothy, Around Town Movers, in my opinion, are the best. That's Around Town Movers. Call them.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, welcome back to the second segment of the Safe Senior Hour, and we're very fortunate to have our guest, Mr. Steve Baker of the Baker Fraud Report. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. Good to be with you again.
Well, we appreciate it, and we appreciate everything you do to help fight fraud, particularly frauds against the elderly. Again, I just want to give a little more background about you to our listeners, that you are currently the Better Business Bureau International Investigative Specialist that addresses various frauds that not only are in this world and day and age, they're all multi-state, multi-country. And you were 30 years of fighting consumer fraud with the Federal Trade Commission. So again, welcome, Steve, and we appreciate everything you do.
Why, thank you. And your radio show goes a long way towards helping people too, so it's a great service.
Well, I just noticed two things in your report, and could you tell everybody how to get your report?
Sure. It is. So I do a weekly newsletter that goes out around the world on what's going on in consumer fraud. A lot of the same frauds we see in the U.S. also hit people in other countries as well. So they're all international. A lot of them are organized, and stuff we're going to see in the U.K. may also appear in the U.S. People can subscribe by going to BakerFraudReport.com, be a pop-up box, and they can sign up, and they get a free weekly newsletter, usually every Thursday, and it doesn't cost anything. And hopefully it gives lets law enforcement and other people see what everybody else is doing and what's new, and if anybody's found an innovative solution. So I try to put a little humor in it too, but again, go to BakerFraudReport.com, get a pop-up box, fill it out, and you should get the newsletter.
Well, I like the humor too. It certainly helps. It's great. I mean, these are obviously very serious topics, but that lets everybody know that we have to look at these things with an open eye and address them, but life still must go on. On your last newsletter, I've got about 2 or 3 items that I hope we can discuss today, but I thought that was interesting that you reported from, I guess, Germany there's a copy of a press release, the double blow to the dark web marketplaces. Could you just go over to our listeners what the dark web is and why this is significant, what happened in Germany?
Yeah, there's a whole segment of the internet that most of us don't have access to and never see. We always think of www, but there's other variations out there too. And so there's this whole dark web that we aren't going to find with a search engine, or we're not going to see, but the crooks all use it. And they use it to communicate with each other and buy and sell stuff. So they have, for example, this is Europol announced last week that across Europe and working with U.S. law enforcement agencies, they shut down 2 international marketplaces that were selling drugs, stolen identities, malware. You can buy how-to kits on how to do malware or ransomware. And these, at least one of these had 5,400 people were selling stuff on one of these sites, and they had over 1 million users that were logging in. So they got a commission when people purchased this stuff, and so the law enforcement across the world working together has shut these things down. So it just shows there is this huge marketplace. In addition, there's also, believe it or not, in Facebook groups has also got marketplaces where crooks get together and trade ideas and ask for information.
We're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
But I think what all this stuff really demonstrates is you kind of tend to think of one isolated guy or small group of guys kind of working alone to do their frauds. But it isn't true. All these guys are connected. They're all talking to each other. They're all learning. So it's something tries something new and it really works, then they can share that with other people, and they can do the same thing too. And the other thing it really demonstrates again is that all of this stuff is is truly worldwide, and these people are working together. And even though you kind of tend to think of scams as kind of, white collar crime, I mean, these are the same people who are involved in selling drugs too. I mean, these are real criminals.
Yeah, reading your article, it was very interesting to me, and I think the listeners will be interested that this was a combined effort. People sometimes think that law enforcement doesn't work together, and but that's just not true. I mean, we should be working more together, but especially on international matters. And I'm just reading from your newsletter here that, as you said, the German Federal Criminal Police shut down this dark market, but they were supported by the Dutch National Police, Europol, and various government federal agencies, Drug Enforcement, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Internal Revenue Service, Homeland Security, U.S. Postal Service, and Department of Justice. And also they cooperating with the Finnish Customs and in cooperation with the French police. When you see this, you realize that it is really a worldwide issue, financial frauds, not just on the elderly, but I think primarily on the elderly. But this is just incredible when you read this, and it was a very, very good takedown in Germany.
Yeah, we'll see if something pops up again. But once you learn, if law enforcement's figured out how these things work, how to shut them down, hopefully they'll be able to do some more of this kind of good collective work.
And the reason this is so important, people want to know how did some of these fraudsters get our names? Well, as you say here, they just bought names and IDs on the dark web, I think. Isn't that what you said? What were you saying? 1 million customer accounts and
yeah, 1.15 million users buying on at least just one of these two dark web marketplaces.
Unbelievable. I look at this and you just realize that it is truly organized crime. I know you and I have that in common when we were in the federal government working various organized crime cases, and this is just a new area where organized crime goes to try to get money. Wherever there's money, that's where they'll go. But now we see it's starting to affect everybody by selling the identities and names. And this can be sold around the world, right? I mean, I think aren't some of these frauds like out of the Ukraine and obviously Nigeria and other areas?
Yeah, they are all over the world. There's a lot of Eastern European, Ukraine, Romanians clearly are doing a whole lot of, they're doing a lot of the ATM skimming operations, and they've got other stuff that they're involved in too. So you've got a large, even in Asia, you've got large populations of Nigerians that have moved out and kind of have colonies around the world, even in mainland China, clearly Indonesia, Thailand, Canada, the United States. There's a lot of them here in the United States too.
Right. I just think that, and again, that poses a problem, especially for local law enforcement. I know when I go around in our job as I coordinate activities in North Georgia, a lot of these crimes will come to a dead end because it'll be somebody will say send the money to the Netherlands or send it to Nigeria. So the locals just stop their investigation, and what we're trying to do is trying to get them more involved in dealing with the federal authorities. And obviously not every case and every complaint is going to end up in a successful arrest, but it's putting a puzzle together. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. You're exactly right. No, it's a huge challenge for local law enforcement. If I had I'm from a small town in Iowa, and I'm trying to imagine being a detective and going to the district attorney and saying, gee, I've got somebody lost $3,000 in a lottery fraud, and we don't know exactly where they are, but we think they're in Jamaica. Can we extradite them? And the DA would say, how much is this going to cost to fly in witnesses? Are you sure? And you just $3,000, that's not that big. Can't you kick that to the feds or do something? Make this thing go away. We don't want to spend the money. It's just too expensive, too complicated. We've never done anything like this before. So it's a huge challenge. You do have to put the pieces together. So the more of that we get, the better. Complaints provide a lot of information, and once they're in a central database, then people can start mining that, looking for connections, and hopefully working with foreign counterparts and do some good. But that's the only way we're ever going to do anything effective, is to really get the data in, and then think of it as like intelligence that needs to be analyzed and studied and mapped out, and then solutions developed to prosecute.
Right. I look at it as like these puzzles that you put on your table, trying to put them together. A little piece might mean nothing until all of a sudden it fits into to the whole picture.
Well, that's exactly right.
Thanks to you, I had a very good meeting with the head of the Federal Trade Commission here in the Southeast, who's a wonderful person, a good friend of yours, as she says, but it's amazing what they're doing. Can you just enlighten the listeners around the U.S. what should be, what they can, information they get from the Federal Trade Commission, and how to pass information on to them, because they're doing one heck of a job. They're really working out there.
Yeah, I think the Federal Trade Commission is the best bargain for the taxpayers ever got for this relatively small agency. So the FTC has been around about 100 years. It does consumer protection and antitrust. We're talking consumer protection these days.
Right.
They shut down a lot of frauds, especially tons of them in South Florida, since you're dealing with the Atlanta office, which is in charge of Florida. So the FTC brings cases and can get injunctions, shut companies down, get money back, which is a pretty powerful tool. What we really need, of course, is these people to go to jail, and the FTC does not have that authority. So it does try to work with criminal agencies. We recently had some guys from Quebec who the FTC had sued, who were calling seniors and claiming to be with Medicare and telling them they had to buy this health insurance stuff or they were going to lose their benefits. So after the FTC resolved its case, the Southern District of Illinois extradited these guys from Quebec, and they just went away for a long time to prison. So it's good to see. So the FTC can bring cases, likes to work with criminal authorities. The FTC also maintains a nationwide database of consumer complaints. So we encourage people to complain. Go to ftc.gov to file a complaint. They can call 877-FTC-HELP and get a live person. And then that database the FTC maintains is available to 3,500 different law enforcement agencies across the country who can log into it. General public can't, because obviously it's got a lot of personal information in it. But for law enforcement agencies, it's a really good tool to help, as you say, put the pieces together, look for patterns. And it's important that people complain. The FTC knows from its own studies the less than 10% of fraud victims ever complain to a Better Business Bureau or a law enforcement agency of any kind. So it's really important that people complain. The FTC maintains those databases. The FTC also brings cases and tries to look after people.
Right. As I said, met with Cindy. Is it Liebs? I believe that.
Liebes. Yeah,
Liebes.
no,
she's great.
She's
the regional director, and she's great. With that, we're going to take our break from the second segment, and we'll be back with Steve Baker on the Baker Fraud Report right after this.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's DOCS, the number 4, patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And again, Joe Gavalis back with the third segment of the Safe Senior Hour, and we are very fortunate to have our guest, Steve Baker from the Baker Fraud Report on. And we've been talking about some interesting matters. One is the dark web, and where our information, where identification information is bought and sold, which is scary. And we want to thank Steve for coming back on.
Great. Good to be with you.
One of his comments in his latest fraud report says a new study said seniors may lose 20 times more to frauds than reported. Boy, that's scary. And I read that, and that's just hit home to me as I go out and talk to seniors all around North Georgia. Is that you think that's about an accurate number there? 25 times? Ooh.
I think it probably is. A whole lot of people they don't know where to go. They want to just forget about it. They're embarrassed. So they just don't reach out. And they think that if they talk to the police, that people will think they're stupid or something like that, and they'll be embarrassed. So they just don't do it. The FTC's own study showed less than 10% of people ever complain.
Yeah.
And with seniors, I think that probably really is. So that we've got just the numbers that are reported are massive. So when you start looking at the people who don't, you realize that we've really got a really, really big problem to deal with here.
Well, and that leads us to a topic that I really want to talk about and delve into is your, I guess, editorial in your fraud report. Is the thought of the week. We need more help for fraud victims. Let's talk about that, because it's very interesting, because as I speak to elders and victims of frauds, we get information, we pass it on to law enforcement or regulatory agencies, but that still leaves a big void in the victim assistance program of some kind. And you deal with the district attorneys and you deal with the U.S. attorney's offices. They have a victim witness program, but there's not an awful lot they can do. And I think, Steve, let's discuss this, because you had some good ideas here.
Well, I kind of came at this from thinking about romance fraud, because for the romance fraud victims, it's bad enough that they lose the money. In fact, a lot of the time that's devastating. They end up on public assistance. But the real problem with romance frauds is they're emotionally devastated. And in fact, there's lots of suicides over romance fraud. And the victims, after it's done, they're susceptible to being contacted and being victimized again by somebody else doing a romance fraud. I've seen it several times. So they really need some support groups. Will be really, really helpful. There's the only ones I know of are in Los Angeles and Ventura, California, and they've got some, and I think they do good work. I mean, the people in those support groups, I've been told, every one of them has at least thought about suicide over this stuff.
Wow.
And we need some support groups, and my understanding is it's not that expensive to set this sort of thing up. I think it's just one of these things that kind of fall in the cracks between different agencies, and nobody really has responsibility for it. But I think it could do a tremendous amount of good. It would really help these people get on with their lives and deal with it. And when I was talking to a victim support person, she also mentioned the families of fraud victims.
Right.
Now, one of the things that happens, you mentioned reporting, sometimes seniors don't report because they're afraid that their kids are going to think that they're losing it and slap them in a nursing home. So they don't report it for that reason. But of course, the families do find out about this. I was just talking to a guy in Wisconsin last week who's got a romance fraud victim. It's a guy, he's 72, he's a Vietnam vet. He's been married 50 years, he's got several kids, and he has fallen in love online with what he thinks is a cute young girl who supposedly needs money for medical expenses. They cannot convince him that he's fallen for a fraud. And basically, they've almost lost their home and everything, their life savings are almost gone. And so a victim support person said, okay, not only do some of these victims need some help, their families do too, because they get these situations where victims have lost tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars to Jamaican lottery frauds, for example. They need some help. And my God, I don't think it's expensive. So I've been urging everybody out there to think of ways we could get just a little bit of funding to set some stuff up to help these people.
Well, I certainly will try to, carry the flag on this in Georgia with my contacts here, because I think it's so important. And I can just tell you that one of the cases I'm familiar with, a gentleman in his 60s did the same thing, fell in love. He's married. He's got 3 kids, but their kids are all in their 50s, their 40s or 50s. And, there's one thing, a romance scam, but people don't understand it, and I want you to comment on it if you would. It doesn't stop with just being a romance scam where I need money to come visit you, darling, or send this, as you just said, it was for health care. It could be for other areas where the money goes. In this case, it was to help get me out of jail in this country. It happened to be, in this case, Nigeria, to get back. And all this obviously is a scam. But it says that because I've read some of the emails after the fact, only you can help me. You're the one, and putting the pressure on the individuals. But that's on the romance scam. So when the scam ends, they go into a different mode, correct?
Oh, yeah. No, even if romance fraud victims don't have any more money, they're still valuable, because if you're running a fraud, the one thing you got to have is a way to get the money. No point in doing a fraud if you can't get paid.
Right.
So they don't want the court, and they know the law enforcement is going to try to follow the money in order to try to catch the bad guys on this. So a lot of the time, having the money go to the romance fraud victims first, who then sends it on. So they're acting as money mules. A lot of people probably saw the Clint Eastwood movie with the mule, which is pretty good, but it's not just drugs, it's
Right.
also stuff. So they're also getting romance fraud victims to transport drugs for them all over the world. And there's I think a couple hundred Americans in prison around the world where romance fraud victims thought they were doing something for somebody they were in love with, did not even realize that they were carrying drugs. So there's a huge network of other frauds that you depend on romance fraud victims to help them do illegal activities. So we really need those people to come forward. There's no interest in prosecuting them if they don't know what they were doing, but law enforcement really wants the information they have to find the people who really are behind all this.
Right. Again, it's putting that puzzle together. There are a lot of pieces to the puzzle. I know when somebody decides through talking to somebody they trust or law enforcement, they decide to break away and not continue this outgoing of money for the individuals. And again, a lot of the money sounds like it's legitimate. Pay for an airfare, and I will meet you in our case, meet you in New York when I fly in, or meet you in Miami, or I'll be coming. I'll come through and set my schedule up. Please pay for my flight to come to Atlanta or come to Dallas or wherever. Well, a lot of times the victim will show up at the airport to meet him, and all of a sudden there'll be a message that I missed the flight, I couldn't go on it, but the money's already been expended. So the money's out. And I think what you were saying is so true. They look at this not as romance, just as a source of funding. But once you stop the funding, this is where it moves into a more threatening area. Have you seen that, Steve?
Absolutely. No, they absolutely threaten people. They had one, I said on the trial of a romance fraud guy, and he had a woman, and they thought they were going to be married, so he had her take off her clothes, get in front of a webcam, and do some sexual stuff. And he recorded it. And then later, when she ran out of money, he said, if you don't send more money, he says, I'm going to put this on your Facebook page for all your friends and family to see. And she says, I got no more money. So he did put it on her Facebook page, the sexually explicit video. So they threaten people like that, or they threaten to turn them into the police for helping launder money. And with Jamaicans, will often threaten people who want to stop sending money for lottery stuff. And they have threats of physical violence. The Jamaicans are using Google Earth to find people's houses, and so they can describe it. Look, you live in the White House in the corner with the green shutters. I'm standing across the street right now, and if you don't send more money, I'm going to do something to your wife or your kids, and violent. And one guy was threatening to rape a woman's daughters, and it scares the snot out of people. Hell, I'd be scared too.
Oh, I would too, but that's the progression. It's, you know, and the problem with romance scams is it's not an immediate scam. They take a lulling time to allegedly get to know you on the internet. Notice they'll almost never talk to you over the phone, and they'll certainly never meet you. And then they get you in, and then they suck you in to get the money. But after the money's paid and you decide you can't do it anymore, we come into this other threats, and these threats are horrible. I was talking to a gentleman, and it was like just exactly like you said, Steve. Threatened to release the pictures. He foolishly made some pictures on the internet, which he certainly regrets. But and it took place, and that's sad. And but they'll use that at that point. And in this case, they threatened to go to they had a friend, quote, friend, in the Federal Bureau of Investigation that they could go to and get him arrested. It was like, the whole thing is just an outrage. But as you say, the elders don't know, and they run scared and tend to do things that they're asked to do. And I think your point is very well taken, is that it doesn't end with just romance. It moves on.
It does, and even if it does, then they'll sell your name to another fraudster. Sometimes they'll call and say, hey, we've caught this guy, we can get your money back, we need money for investigative costs. So you're never really free of these things. The other thing it's important for your listeners to remember is, the general public hearing about these things is, well, okay, but these victims have got to be like dumb and desperate, and this has got to be pretty rare. It doesn't happen all that often. Unfortunately, this romance fraud stuff is so common that I about guarantee you it's happening to people we know in our towns and our neighborhoods. People just don't like to talk about it. They don't want to report it, but it is all around us. I mean, some stuff they've done in the UK says you're 10 times more likely to be victim of a consumer fraud in one of these sorts of things than you are to be mugged or have your house burglarized. It is really, really common.
Well, I know it's a big problem, and thanks to your report, I go over it weekly, and I try to talk about it on air, because, as you know, this show goes not only just all over our country, but it goes all over the world, since it's on web radio, and let people know. And I think some of the points that you mentioned were very interesting. And the one case I'm familiar with, another female contacted the victim and knew about his previous breakup, quote, breakup, and wanted to console him and that she could be of help. So as you say, they passed the names around, and they tried to get more and more money out of the individual. It's all about the money. These professionals, They could care less about anything else but the money. I think,
You said a mouthful there. That's certainly true. And they leave a lot of devastated lives behind them with this stuff.
right, they do. I do want to go into a little more detail. We're about to take a break here shortly, and go into more about this. Your thoughts on the fraud victims, because I do want to run that by you, because I would like to try to work on that here in the North Georgia area. So with that,
Okay.
Steve, we'll be back for our last segment shortly, and back with our guest, Steve Baker.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
This is Daryl Pullis inviting you to listen to America's Homegrown Veggie Show right here every Saturday morning at 10 Eastern Time. Great guests, great tips, and valuable information about growing your own vegetables, fruits, and herbs.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is for our final segment, and we're very honored.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
To have Steve Baker, our guest on, the founder of the Baker Fraud Report. And Steve, we were talking about your editorial and your thoughts, because we'd like to do that, and I think a lot of other communities were, about setting up some kind of fraud victim support groups. Do you think who do you envision, or how are these run now? I mean, who's in the groups and who's leading them, and your thoughts about that?
Well, there's a couple different groups we can have. The only ones of any sort that I'm aware of in the U.S. are in the LA area. They're
Right.
for romance fraud victims. Obviously, support groups for others kinds would be useful too. So in LA and Ventura, these are both initiated by an FBI victim assistance person lives in Ventura, California, named Debbie Deem, and she works with a lot of victims. She spends a lot of her personal time after hours visiting with people that have been repeat fraud victims, and she set these things up. There's, I believe, a state agency that's got one person part-time that set this thing up for romance fraud victims, and I believe that they've put the word out to all the law enforcement agencies in the LA area that if you come across a romance fraud victim, please send them our way to the support groups. And then the support groups allow everybody, I think in LA they do it by phone. In person obviously would be better. And it really, I think, can help people because one of the things that the crooks do with romance fraud victims is they try to isolate them from their normal social structure. They warn them that, their friends and family and others who would otherwise be their support are not to be trusted. The only person they can trust is the fraudster. So by the time these things are over, sometimes they borrow money from friends and family to send off to the frauds and can't pay it back. and they're a real risk of, doing this again. So when they've got the support groups, they can get on the phone with each other, realize that they're not alone, and say, that sounds right. Okay, I've heard that. Now I understand how this works, because people tend to blame themselves, and this gives them a way to do that and a way to hold on and to hear from other people who've been able to recover and move forward. And that, I think, is a huge service to people. So I think they really, really, really need that. And like I say, I don't think it need be expensive. You just need somebody who's halfway trained to set this up. I'm sure the people in Los Angeles would be happy to share their expertise. Joe, I can share contact information with you later if you'd like.
Yes, please do.
Okay, and they can talk about how they do it. The only other place like I'm familiar with does something like that is in Australia, where the police were themselves holding monthly support group meetings. And that seems to have done a lot of good too. And a lot of those victims were also, well, some of them were willing to talk publicly to media and other places and how this worked. In other words, to do some consumer education from the person who's been there and try to prevent other people from becoming victims forward and getting other people who have been victims to step forward. And these people are very susceptible to being ripped off again. I've talked to victims myself in one of my studies who said, well, they've already got my money. I don't have anything to worry about. I'll get back online and see if I can't find somebody nice. And then they find that even if they don't have the money, the fraudsters are still interested in them because they want to use them to launder money for other frauds. So all these people are really at risk of being victimized again, and really need some support. And I got to think that this will prevent some suicides as well.
I agree, and I will definitely, and I look forward to getting your contacts. The Australian one, it sounds interesting. I mean, this sounds like we could certainly, we probably just have to get some statistics of either people going into severe depression or the suicides throughout the country. I don't know if that's ever been done, but I do know on one of the victims that I was talking to, that was an ongoing and I'll brag on you. I would send them segments from your fraud report, articles that took place around the world, that this is not just happening in his world or our world, it's happening all over the world. And it really helped. In fact, I got an email back from the gentleman. He said, thank you. It really helps to know I'm not alone. And that's what got me thinking. And when I saw your editorial, I think this is very apropos. And as you say, you could apply it to not just romance scams, but to other scams. Because these people it's an addiction, don't you think? Like sweepstakes scams and things, people are addicted to this.
They're filling some they're filling some very basic human needs and wants. And yeah, people do get into these things and they get hooked. And there are some people in the world of seniors, of course, who are starting to slip a little bit. Maybe they can still handle their finances, pay their bills, but they've got some stuff. The crooks know that, and they take advantage of those people. So
Yeah.
There's a huge need. In fact, the other thing I really think we ought to have would be a national organization of fraud victims, something people could sign up for, get newsletters, warnings, help them connect with each other. Who knows, maybe they could, continue to be educated, and maybe they could push for legislation and more law enforcement. It would certainly be, there's God sakes, there's millions of people out there who've been ripped off, and I think if we could organize them a little bit, it would do some great stuff.
Well, I liked what you said about the Australian plan, and I think that has a lot to do with it, especially whether we do it by video or, have people come in person. I know, and I'm sure you do, we have people who've been scamsters in the business world that have done their time. They now go out and talk to businesses with the support of former federal agents. And they'll go out and they'll put a seminar on about what to look for, what to do, don't do it, that kind of situation. And I think people that we can get some kind of dialogue going, and I don't know how, and that's why I'd be interested what the Australian model was, because that I could see going into these senior centers, and I go to them all the time, just to have somebody that's, it's real. I try to bring it to the local law enforcement officers. So, and these are rural areas that I'm going into. I mean, there are little towns and stuff, but people in rural areas are getting conned just as much as people in the big metropolitan areas. Don't you find that? It's just not.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's certainly true. That's why I say it's in our areas, our neighborhoods. And with anybody that's got an internet connection, which is almost everybody anymore, can be conned, and they don't care. So, no, they do get people. The other thing the FTC has found in terms of educating seniors on fraud is they have developed a program called Pass It On. So what they found in some of their stuff is that if you just talk to seniors and say, there's all this fraud out there, be afraid, be very afraid, that people kind of tend to tune it out. But if instead you put it, we want to educate you so you can help your friends and neighbors and relatives from being ripped off. So we're going to empower you so you can become an expert and help other people. The people really pay a lot closer attention and really kind of become invested in being helpers on fighting this fraud.
Right.
That's just an interesting tip.
No. We do. Actually, we don't use it, pass it on. But in our talks, I always have a local law enforcement, whether it's the police and or the sheriff together, the DA if possible, but adult protective. And I'll look at these people, and there'll be maybe 40, 50, sometimes we've had 150 seniors, and say, look, you have 150 you know your relatives, you know other people in your neighborhood, you know loved ones. This is what you're looking at. This is the main force to fight elder abuse is right here. If we don't hear from you, we don't know what's happening. So you have to be our teachers into the community, our educators, and people like that. But I look forward to it. I'm going to try to talk to Cindy again, where we have a good relationship with now with her and with the state agency. So we're going to try to come in, and I'm going to really try to take this model that you're talking about. And if you have anything on that Australian model, if you could just point me in the right direction, I'd like to look at that, and we'll get in contact with the people out in LA, because these victims, they really need it. They need some help. And one of your articles, which I told the listeners, was out of British Columbia, where this woman lost everything. I don't know if you remember that article, that she lost it and actually flew down to sold her house and everything and came back. The whole thing was a fraud and came back, and then she committed suicide. I think it was up in Victoria. Yeah. And people don't like to talk about that, but that's what's happening out there, because people have put all their faith, and they think they're just totally embarrassed and not realizing everybody is susceptible to these types of cons and frauds. And anyway, I can't thank you enough for bringing it to our attention. I'll look forward to working with you, and look forward with you having you back on the Safe the Senior Hour. And I do appreciate everything you do. So with that, we'll let you go, and that'll end our session today on the Safe Senior Hour.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down